He said it with the microphone still in his own hand, not a reporter's. Still our driver. That's Toto Wolff in the paddock after a Mercedes 1-2-3 in qualifying that had nothing to do with the man he was talking about, except that it had everything to do with him 5 times. That's the number. 5 separate moments across 19 months where the man who runs Mercedes stopped what he was doing to say something warm about the driver who left him for Ferrari. Start with the leaving itself. Lewis Hamilton spent 12 years at Mercedes from 2013 to 2024 and won 6 of his 7 titles wearing their silver. When he announced he was going to Ferrari, most of the paddock expected the usual choreography. Gracious statement, thank you for the memories, best of luck. What nobody quite priced in was how often Wolff would keep talking about him after the cameras stopped rolling on the goodbye tour. The first one came in Las Vegas, November 2024, before the final races of that farewell season. Wolff didn't wait for a retrospective piece or an end-of-year interview. Standing in the paddock after practice, with Hamilton having just topped the session on his way out the door, Wolff told reporters there was no need to manufacture emotion for the send-off because the partnership had earned a proper one on its own terms. He'd said before more than once that he considered Hamilton the greatest driver of all time. He didn't walk that back. He repeated it on his way out. Then came Abu Dhabi, the actual last race. Wolff didn't do a press conference goodbye. He left a voice note. Mercedes posted it themselves. Black and white photos underneath. Wolff's voice talking about a boy from Stevenage who had a dream and shared the journey with them. He called it, in his own words, the most important message he'd ever sent Hamilton. Not the biggest sponsor call of his career, not a contract renewal, a goodbye voice note. Here's the part that actually should give you pause, and here's your first CTA because this is where the pattern starts to look intentional rather than sentimental. If you're new here, hit subscribe now because we track exactly this kind of thing, the moment a boss says more than he needs to. And tell me where you're watching from in the comments. That question about location gets more replies on this channel than anything else we post, so don't skip it. By January 2025, Hamilton hadn't driven a single competitive lap for Ferrari yet. He'd only posed for photos. And Wolff, at the Autosport Awards, speaking to Sky Sports, brought it up unprompted. He called the images iconic, compared it, half joking, to watching an ex-partner show up with someone new and somehow still being happy for them. That's not a line you plan. That's a line that slips out because the feeling is still there. Now, who was doubting any of this? Nobody in the paddock, really, expected Wolff to go quiet on Hamilton. What people underestimated was the frequency. Team principals usually ration their praise for departed drivers to 1 clean interview, maybe 2, and then let the subject close. Wolff kept reopening it. Let's run the questions the skeptics actually ask, because they deserve real answers, not a dodge. Is this just PR dressed up as sentiment? Partly sure, every public word from a team boss carries some PR weight. Does that mean the sentiment isn't real? No, because PR doesn't require repetition over 19 months when the story would have died after one goodbye quote. Is Wolff just a naturally sentimental guy who talks like this about everyone? That's the one worth testing properly, and we're about to. Because Wolff has also spent this same period praising George Russell and Kimi Antonelli constantly, and it would be dishonest of this channel to pretend otherwise. He called Russell underrated. He called Antonelli's Monaco win unbelievable, said the kid was at times a second and a half faster than anyone else on track. He praised Antonelli's development after a botched start in Japan. He talked about Russell's experience paying off at a wet Austrian qualifying. Here's the actual difference, and it's not about volume, it's about trigger. Every single Russell or Antonelli quote we found is tied to a result. Pole position, a win, a strong recovery drive. Take the result away and the quote doesn't exist. The Hamilton quotes don't work that way. The GOAT comment in Budapest came during one of the worst stretches of Hamilton's career. A season where he'd called himself useless out loud after a poor qualifying, where he hadn't been near a podium in Ferrari red for the better part of a year. Wolff praised him anyway, with nothing to point to on a timing sheet. That's the mirror. 2 drivers currently winning races for him, praised for winning races. One driver who left him struggling, praised for existing. Now hold that thought, because it has just widened. In June 2025, on Dax Shepard's Armchair Expert podcast, Wolff went further than sentiment. He admitted relief that Hamilton chose to leave on his own terms, because Wolff himself couldn't have made that call, not for the greatest champion the team ever had. He said Hamilton might have felt Wolff's hesitation too, and made the decision partly to spare them both the conversation. That's not a man being polite about an ex-driver. That's a man admitting he was avoiding a conversation he didn't have the stomach for. Second CTA, and this one's a vote, not just a comment. Was he always this warm about Hamilton, or did the guilt of nearly having to cut him loose make it warmer after the fact? Like this video for the first answer, comment for the second, and hit subscribe if you want the next one the moment it drops. The math on this is what makes it land. 5 confirmed instances, spread across roughly a race calendar and a half, means Wolff has said something publicly affectionate about Hamilton on average once every 3.5 months. Whether Hamilton was winning, losing, or simply posing for a photo in a red suit. Compare that to how quickly most team principal and former driver relationships go quiet. Most fade to a nod at the paddock gate within a year. This one hasn't faded once. There's an earlier data point that makes this land harder. Back in that same farewell period, before any of this warmth became public, a book by Matt Wyman quoted Wolff saying every driver has a shelf life, and that Hamilton leaving spared Mercedes from having to make that call themselves. Wolff spent days afterward insisting the quote was taken out of context, that he and Hamilton talked it through immediately and moved past it. Read those two things side by side. A private admission that sounded almost clinical, followed by 18 months of public warmth that never let up. Either the clinical version was the real one and the warmth is compensation, or the warmth was always the real one and the shelf lifeline was clumsy phrasing under pressure. We don't get to know which for certain, and we're not going to pretend we do. What we can say structurally is this: Wolff no longer employs Hamilton, has every incentive to talk about his own current drivers instead, and keeps choosing not to. Antonelli is leading the championship. Russell is fighting for podiums every weekend. Wolff has plenty of winning material sitting right in his own garage. He keeps bringing the conversation back to a man wearing red. Here's the best argument against reading anything into this at all. Wolff and Hamilton spent 12 years building the most successful partnership Formula One has ever seen. 6 titles, 246 races together, by the longest count in the sport's history. People who share that kind of history talk about each other warmly for the rest of their lives. Full stop, no hidden mechanism required. Old teammates do this. Old friends do this. Maybe this is exactly what it looks like on the surface, and the search for a deeper pattern says more about how this channel watches football than about what Wolff actually feels. That argument holds up until you put the frequency next to it. People who share history talk warmly once a year, at an anniversary, in a retrospective interview. Wolff is doing it every few months, unprompted, often when there's no news peg forcing the question. That's the part the simple explanation doesn't fully cover. Is this something Wolff has genuinely never done for another driver he's managed? That's the claim in the title, and we're not going to dress it up as settled. Nobody has run a full audit of every word Wolff has said about every driver he's ever overseen, including Nico Rosberg, Valtteri Bottas, and the drivers who came through the junior program before Russell and Antonelli. What we do have is a clear, sourced, 5-instance pattern specific to Hamilton, and a clear contrast with how Wolff talks about his current lineup. Whether that makes it unique to Hamilton or just the most visible because Hamilton is the most visible driver Wolff has ever had is a legitimate question. It's legitimate precisely because we can't fully close it. Watch how Wolff talks about his next departing driver, whenever that happens, and you'll have your answer before we will. Third CTA, because this next part is the one worth sticking around for. If Wolff is still this attached to a driver wearing a rival's colors, what does that tell you about what happens if Hamilton ever has a genuinely strong season in red? Does the warmth survive a real title fight between them, or does it curdle the moment Hamilton starts beating Mercedes on Sunday, instead of just showing up for photos on Thursday? What this pattern actually changes on the paddock chessboard is worth sitting with. A team principal's public affection for a rival's driver is not neutral. It shapes how Ferrari's own garage reads Hamilton standing outside their walls. It shapes how Antonelli and Russell interpret their own praise when they know the boss still keeps a warmer register in reserve for someone else. And it shapes how the wider paddock treats Hamilton's Ferrari struggles, less as a fallen champion story and more as a man still half-claimed by his old team. So here's the read. Wolff has praised Hamilton 5 separate times since he left. Spaced across almost every phase Hamilton has gone through at Ferrari, good, bad, and photograph only. Every one of those 5 moments happened without a result forcing his hand, which is not how Wolff talks about the drivers currently winning him races. Whether that makes Hamilton the only driver who ever got this treatment, we can't prove and won't pretend to. What we can say is that 5 is the number, and it's a number Wolff hasn't matched in this same period for anyone still on his own payroll. We've talked before on this channel about the difference between a team boss protecting a driver and a team boss missing one, back when we covered Wolff's comments after the Spanish Grand Prix. This is the same instinct, just showing up again and again instead of once. Next real test comes fast. If Hamilton has another strong weekend before the season turns, watch whether Wolff reaches for the microphone again, unprompted, the same way he has 5 times already. If he does, the average holds. If he suddenly goes quiet, that silence will tell you more than any of the 5 quotes did. Until the next one.